At dinner, my father said, "No man wants a poor single mom." The clinking of silverware stopped for just a second, long enough for the words to land like stones across the table. My brother laughed, a short, sharp sound that carried more mockery than humor. "She should be grateful if anyone wants her," he added. My mother stayed quiet, pretending to adjust her napkin. And I just smiled. Because what none of them knew, what no one at that table even suspected, was that I'd spent the morning signing a multi-million-dollar expansion deal for my resort chain in the Maldives. The chandelier light shimmered above the dining table, throwing reflections on the glassware. The dinner was supposed to be a casual family gathering, a monthly ritual that my father insisted on maintaining for the sake of family values. The irony was never lost on me. My family loved tradition when it came to appearances, but compassion, respect, that had never been part of the menu. I sat at the far end, the seat I'd always been given, the one closest to the kitchen door. It was as if they still saw me as the help, the daughter who'd made a series of poor life choices, the single mother who ruined her chances, the woman who in their eyes had disappointed every expectation. My father's voice broke through my thoughts again. "You know, Elena," he said, using that tone, half pity, half judgment, "you really should think about what kind of example you're setting for Leo." I looked up. "And what kind is that, Dad?" "The wrong one," he said flatly. "A boy needs to see success, stability, not a mother chasing impossible dreams." My brother Daniel smirked over his wine glass. "What Dad means is, maybe try something safe for once, like a receptionist job. Or, I don't know, marry someone stable. You can't build a life on fantasies." Their words used to sting. They used to bury themselves under my skin until I couldn't breathe. But not anymore. That night I wasn't angry, I was calm. Because I knew something they didn't. I didn't need their approval anymore. The waiter poured more wine, and the conversation turned to my brother's engagement. The air around Daniel seemed to swell with self-importance as he detailed the country club menu. Daniel had recently proposed to Clara, a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a glossy lifestyle magazine. My father beamed when he talked about their upcoming wedding at the Grand Haven Country Club. "Now that's a match that makes sense," he said proudly. "She comes from good stock. Her father's in banking. Real success, not playing resort builder on the internet." I tilted my glass, watching the deep red swirl inside. Resort builder on the internet. That's what he called it, as if my decade of work, the empire I'd built from nothing, was some hobby for bored housewives. "Tell me, Elena," Daniel said suddenly, leaning forward with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "How's your, what do you call it, resort business? Still catering to honeymooners and Instagram models?" I smiled faintly. "Something like that." He chuckled. "Well, maybe one day you'll land a real investor. Or a husband. Whichever comes first." My mother sighed softly. "Daniel," but she didn't finish the sentence. She never did. I turned my gaze toward her. "It's okay, Mom. Everyone's allowed an opinion." I raised my glass slightly in a mock toast. "To the family and to all the things we think we know." They didn't understand the irony. They never did. Then my father's phone rang. He frowned, annoyed at the interruption, but when he saw the name flashing on the screen, his expression shifted. "It's Henry," he said, one of his longtime business partners and golfing buddies. "I should take this." He stepped away from the table, pressing the phone to his ear. "Henry." "What's up?" he said cheerfully. A pause. Then his face changed. Confusion. Disbelief. A nervous laugh. "What, my daughter?" he said, glancing toward me. "Are you sure?" The table went quiet. I sipped my wine, pretending not to notice. "Yes," my father said again, slower this time. "You saw her on TV?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. "TV, why would you—" My father didn't answer. He was listening now, and we all could hear the faint echo of Henry's voice through the speaker. "Just saw your daughter on CNBC. Henry said, his tone full of amusement. "The billionaire who owns those luxury resorts in the Maldives' impressive empire she's got there, Tom. You must be proud." My father froze. Completely. The silence that followed was thick, the kind of silence that holds its breath. He looked at me across the table. What is he talking about? I set my glass down gently. You heard him. Daniel laughed nervously. Wait, this is a joke, right? I leaned back slightly, meeting his gaze. You could say that? Except the punchline's been running my company for 8 years. My mother's fork clinked against her plate. Elena, are you saying— Yes, Mom, I said softly. The resorts. The ones you called my little hobby. They're mine. All of them. My brother scoffed. You expect us to believe that I opened my phone, slid it across the table, the screen displaying a live news segment. Elena Rivera, the billionaire behind Azure Palms Resorts, expands her empire with new properties in the Maldives and Bali. The image on screen was me standing in front of a turquoise ocean shaking hands with the Minister of Tourism. Daniel's smirk disappeared. My father's color drained. He sat down slowly, still gripping his phone. You never told us. I looked at him steadily. Would you have listened? No one spoke. The clinking of glasses and the distant hum of other diners filled the space where our family's laughter should have been. After a moment, my father whispered almost to himself, I thought you were struggling. I thought you needed help. I did, I said, rising from my chair. Just not the kind you were willing to give. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. I turned toward the window. The reflection showed my face calm and certain, a face I'd earned through every sleepless night, every rejection, every sacrifice. I used to think your approval was on the horizon, I said quietly. Now I know it was just fog. My father stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Maybe he was. I have a meeting in Dubai tomorrow, I said, reaching for my coat. But I'm glad we had dinner. It's good to know what people really think of you before the world tells them who you are. I paused at the doorway, turned back just once and smiled. And Dad? Tell Henry. I said thank you for the free PR. Then I left. Outside, the night air was cool and the city lights shimmered against the glass towers, reflections of a life they'd never imagined I could have. I walked to my car, heels clicking softly on the pavement, each step steady, deliberate, free. Behind me, through the restaurant window, I could still see my father staring at his untouched wine glass. That was the night he finally realized who I really was. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need him to. I learned early that silence was safer than asking for what I wanted. Growing up in the Rivera house meant that dreams came with conditions and approval was currency I could never seem to earn. My brother Daniel got the private school, the new car, the constant reassurance that he was destined for greatness. I got lectures about being practical and a scholarship to a local community college, because as my father said, there's no point wasting real money on something uncertain. When I was 16, my mother told me, "Sweetheart, you have a kind heart. But not everyone is meant to be extraordinary." I remember nodding politely, hiding the spark that sentence had ignited. That spark would one day build an empire. After high school, I worked 2 jobs: receptionist at a travel agency by day, waitress at a beachfront cafe by night. I remember the sting of serving tourists who barely met my eyes, treating me as disposable as the paper napkins on their glossy tables. I carried their cocktails to tables overlooking a sea I knew I would one day own. But that's where I learned something no business degree could teach: the difference between luxury and meaning. One night I stayed late to help clean up after a storm had knocked half the chairs into the sand. The owner, Mrs. Parker, handed me a cup of coffee and said, "You know, Elena, you're the only one who shows up early and leaves last. That'll take you farther than you think." I didn't know it then, but that conversation would echo years later when I founded Azure Palms Resort. Back then, I didn't even own a passport. I just had a notebook filled with sketches, designs of villas I'd never seen, beaches I'd only imagined. I'd draw them on napkins, on receipts, on the backs of menus, and tell myself one day. The turning point came when I met Ethan Leo's father. He was charming, ambitious, the kind of man who made promises sound like plans. For a while, I believed him. We met at a charity gala where I'd been working as staff. He was a guest. He said I had the eyes of someone who belonged somewhere bigger. It felt like validation, the kind I'd been starving for my whole life. We moved in together after a year. I thought I was building a future. Instead, I was building his. When I got pregnant, he told me he wasn't ready. "You'll understand," he said, "once you're older." Then he left. My father called it predictable. My mother called it embarrassing. Daniel laughed. "Well, maybe this will teach you responsibility." I remember sitting on the hospital bed after giving birth to Leo, holding his tiny hand and whispering, "You and me, kid. That's enough." Those were the years no one saw, the nights I rocked him to sleep with one arm while answering client emails with the other. In the mornings, I'd take the bus across town with him, wrapped in a blanket, praying the daycare would open early. I was broke, exhausted, invisible. But I was never hopeless. A few years later, while working as an assistant for a travel blogger, I saw the power of perception up close. A single photo of a beachside bungalow, a caption about luxury redefined, and suddenly the place was booked for months. That's when it clicked. Luxury wasn't just about money. It was about a story, emotion, experience. So I started building mine. I took every freelance gig I could: social media, branding, content creation. I learned photography, web design, SEO, all of it teaching myself through sleepless nights. The first website I ever built was for a small guest house in Cebu. I charged $200 and cried when the payment cleared. From there, I launched a tiny consultancy, Blue Wave Marketing, helping boutique hotels build their online presence. Within a year, my clients doubled, and I'd saved enough to fly overseas for the first time. My first destination, the Maldives. I'll never forget stepping off that plane, the smell of salt, the blinding turquoise water, the way the horizon looked infinite. I knew in that instant I'd found my canvas. The resort I stayed in was breathtaking and completely soulless. It had everything money could buy, but none of the warmth I'd seen in the cafe by the beach where I used to work. Guests were just transactions, not stories. I thought, if I ever build something like this, it'll be different. Back home, I pitched my idea to investors. They laughed. "You're a single mom with no degree in hospitality," one said. "What do you know about resorts?" I smiled and said, "Everything I've lived." No one funded me, so I funded myself. I sold my car, cashed out my savings, and partnered with a local builder who believed in second chances. Together, we built the first Azure Palms, 10 villas on borrowed land, constructed from reclaimed wood and dreams. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. Guests started coming: backpackers, honeymooners, families. They'd leave handwritten notes saying, "This place feels like home." That was all the validation I needed. When travel magazines started calling, I thought it was a mistake. One article led to another, then a feature in Forbes Travel, calling Azure Palms a masterclass in emotional luxury. Bookings skyrocketed. Investors who'd laughed before now wanted in. I said no to most of them, because I remembered who I built it for: the people who wanted beauty, without pretending comfort, without arrogance. But while my world was expanding, my family stayed the same. My father never asked about my work. Daniel would send sarcastic messages like, "How's your island spa thing?" I'd smile at my screen, type back, "It's good," and go back to running a company with 200 employees. The last time I visited home before dinner, my father asked if I was still doing that travel blog nonsense. I told him I had a few properties overseas. He chuckled. "I hope you're not getting scammed." That night, as I packed to fly back to the Maldives, I stood in my childhood room, the same cracked walls, the faded posters of beaches I once dreamed of. I realized something simple but powerful: they didn't believe in me because they didn't understand me. And that was no longer my problem. I looked at the photo of Leo on my desk, his gap-toothed smile framed by palm trees, and whispered, "We're going to build something they can't ignore." I turned off the light, closed the door, and walked away, not just from the house, but from the version of myself that still needed to be seen. They called me a poor single mom, but I was already becoming the woman who would own the horizon. By the time I got home that night, the city lights had turned to a dull blur outside my window. I kicked off my heels, dropped my clutch on the counter, and exhaled for what felt like the first time all day. The silence of my apartment was almost comforting: clean lines, warm light, and the faint hum of the ocean beyond the terrace. I had built this space the way I'd built my life, simple, strong mine. My phone buzzed. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Dad flashed across the screen. I let it ring. Then it rang again. Then a text. "We need to talk." I poured myself a glass of water, sat on the couch, and stared at the message until it disappeared behind the phone's lock screen. There was nothing to talk about. He'd said enough. The next morning, Leo came bouncing into my room, hair sticking up in every direction, holding a drawing of what looked like a palm tree and a sun. "It's our island, Mommy," he said proudly. "I made it for your office." I smiled, pulling him into a hug. "It's perfect," I whispered. As I watched him run off to the kitchen, I thought about the words my father had thrown at me, poor single mom. The irony was sharp. Every resort, every beachfront villa, every polished marble lobby I'd built, none of it came close to what I'd created in the absolute unearned certainty in that little boy's smile. My assistant Maya arrived shortly after, a tablet in one hand and coffee in the other. "Morning, boss. You look like you slept 3 hours. 2, I said. "But at least I left dinner with my dignity." She grinned. "I read the article this morning. You're trending again, CNBC, Forbes, even some lifestyle blogs. The billionaire mom who redefined luxury. That's what they're calling you now." I rolled my eyes. "They always love a headline. The truth's less glamorous." Maya raised an eyebrow. Still, it must have felt good watching his face when he found out. I paused, remembering the moment, the shock, the disbelief, the fragile pride cracking in his eyes. "It didn't feel good," I said finally. "It just felt finished." Maya nodded. Closure's still a victory. We spent the morning reviewing expansion plans. The next resort would open in Santorini, a series of cliffside villas overlooking the Aegean Sea. Investors were already circling, offering capital in exchange for shares, but I had no interest in selling pieces of my vision. "You're the only CEO I know who turns down multi-million-dollar offers," Maya teased. "I've learned that some partnerships cost more than they pay," I said. By noon, my phone buzzed again. This time Clara's name appeared. "Daniel's fiancé." I hesitated before answering. "Hey, Clara," I said, keeping my tone polite. "Elena, I just wanted to say, last night was wild." Her voice trembled slightly, half nervous, half excited. "I mean, no one had any idea. You're that Elena Rivera. I feel terrible about what Daniel said." I laughed softly. "Don't." He meant every word. And honestly, it was overdue. She exhaled. "Well, for what it's worth, I think you're incredible. My dad couldn't stop talking about your brand this morning. He said he stayed at one of your Maldives resorts. He called it flawless." "That's kind of him," I said. "Tell him I appreciate it." "I will. And, Elena, I hope you'll still come to the wedding." Daniel's embarrassed, but he's too proud to admit it. "Clara," I said gently, "tell him I wish him the best. But I don't attend celebrations where respect isn't on the guest list." There was a pause, then a quiet, "I understand." After the call ended, I stood by the window looking out at the ocean. It glittered beneath the noon sun, endless and indifferent, a reminder that life moved forward whether people apologized or not. Around 3, I met with my legal advisor to finalize the resort partnership with a European investor group. As we wrapped up, she said, "It's poetic, you know. The same family that mocked you for dreaming now reads about you in Forbes. That's not just success, that's symmetry." I smiled faintly. "Maybe, but revenge fades faster than peace." That evening I took Leo to the beach near our home. He ran along the sand chasing waves, his laughter cutting through the sound of the tide. I sat on a rock, phone in hand, scrolling through unread messages from my father. "Call me. We need to talk. You've made your point. Let's be adults about this." Adults. The word almost made me laugh. He'd spent years treating me like a child incapable of building a life. Now he wanted a meeting of equals. The sun dipped low, painting the water in shades of gold and pink. Leo came running back, sand clinging to his legs. "Mom, do you think Grandpa will ever visit our island?" I hesitated. Maybe one day, I said softly. That night, after putting Leo to bed, I opened my laptop. My inbox was flooded journalists requesting interviews, investors seeking meetings, a dozen new resort proposals, and then buried between them an email from my father. Subject: I owe you an apology. Message I didn't know. I'm proud of you. Let's talk soon. Love, Dad. For a moment, I just stared at the words. There was no weight behind them, no acknowledgement of what he'd said, what he'd made me feel for years. I'm proud of you. Pride was easy when success made it convenient. It didn't feel like the hard-won apology I'd needed a decade ago. It felt like a transaction, a polite closing remark after a long silence. I closed the laptop. I walked out onto the terrace. The city was still, the lights blurring softly against the glass towers. The apology he offered now was too simple, too cheap. The price of his pride had been my silence and my effort, and he couldn't buy back those years with a single email. The next morning, a letter arrived not from him, but from my mother. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. Your father didn't mean to hurt you. He just doesn't understand the world you built. I hope someday you can forgive him, not for his sake, but for yours. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and tucked it into my journal. Forgiveness. The word lingered heavy and hollow. I wasn't ready yet, but maybe someday. That night, as I watched Leo sleeping, I whispered to the dark, "You'll never have to earn my love." Not the way I had to. The ocean breeze slipped through the window, carrying the scent of salt and something sweeter, freedom. The world outside finally knew who I was. But for the first time, I realized something deeper. I didn't build my empire to prove them wrong. I built it so I could raise my son in a world where no one would ever make him feel small for dreaming. The first time I realized success could feel lonely was the night my company won the Global Hospitality Award. The ballroom was filled with laughter, applause, and champagne, but none of it felt real. My name echoed through the speakers, Elena Rivera, founder and CEO of Azure Palms Resorts, and I stood there smiling for cameras that didn't care who I used to be. The lights and noise were overwhelming, a dazzling facade over a hollow space. Flashbulbs flickered, but all I could think about was how my father would have dismissed it as a nice photo op. I felt isolated, surrounded by people who celebrated the headline but didn't know the story. When I got off stage, a man from Forbes shook my hand. "You're quite the story," he said. "Single mother to billionaire resort magnate. That's what we call the American dream." I smiled politely. "The dream's expensive," I said. He laughed like I'd made a joke, but I wasn't kidding. Every milestone had cost me something: friends, sleep, softness, and family most of all. After the ceremony, I slipped outside to the balcony overlooking the city. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that stung your lungs but made you feel alive. I leaned against the railing, my dress glittering faintly under the city lights, and for the first time that night I exhaled. "Beautiful view," a voice said behind me. It was Marcus Hale, my CFO, sharp, loyal, the kind of man who saw numbers as poetry. "Depends which direction you're looking," I said. He handed me a glass of water. "You disappeared halfway through your own celebration. Thought you might need this." I took the glass. "Just taking a moment." Marcus studied me. "You know, most people would kill for what you've built. Most people don't know what it costs to keep it," I said quietly. He nodded and we stood in silence for a while, the hum of traffic far below us. "You've proven everyone wrong," he said. "But you don't look happy." "I'm proud," I said. "Happiness is different." He didn't push. That was the thing about Marcus. He understood silence. Later that week, I flew to Bali to inspect the new resort site. It was supposed to be a quick trip, a few meetings, a press shoot, then back home. But being surrounded by beauty only reminded me of everything I'd lost trying to build it. One afternoon, I sat by the infinity pool overlooking the ocean. My laptop balanced on my knees, emails piling up faster than I could read them. Investors wanted updates. The design team needed approvals. The press wanted quotes. My life was a storm of responsibility disguised as glamour. I closed the laptop and stared at the horizon. Somewhere beyond that line was my family people who still pretended I didn't exist until my name appeared in print. I hadn't spoken to my father since dinner. He'd sent a few messages, each one shorter than the last, until they stopped altogether. My brother, on the other hand, had found new ways to reach me. One morning I woke to a voicemail from Daniel. His voice was careful, forced. "Hey, Elena. Look, I know things got weird after the dinner. Dad's embarrassed, you know how he gets. But maybe you could help him out. His company's restructuring, and well, they're talking layoffs. I thought maybe you'd have connections." I listened twice just to make sure I heard it right. The same brother who'd laughed at me for chasing dreams was asking me to save our father's job. I deleted the voicemail. That night I joined the staff for dinner at the resort. The chefs insisted on serving me their favorite local dishes: grilled fish rice wrapped in banana leaves, spicy sambal that made my eyes water. They laughed when I coughed, and I laughed too. For the first time in days, I felt human. After dinner, I walked along the beach barefoot. The stars were scattered across the sky, reflected in the tide. My phone buzzed again, Daniel. This time a text. "If you don't help him, he's going to lose everything. You're his daughter. You owe him." I stopped walking. The waves rolled in and broke at my feet, cool against my skin. I typed back slowly, "I owed him when I was 12, and he told me to stop dreaming. I owed him when I begged for help after Leo was born, and he said, 'You made your bed.' I don't owe him anymore. I didn't send it. I deleted it instead. Some truths are better kept than said." The next morning I checked my emails again. A new message stood out among the business contracts and press inquiries. It was from a man named Jonathan Pierce, a senior executive from a luxury investment group. Subject line: proposal for partnership, Azure Palms Global. I opened it, scanning the details. They wanted to buy 20% of my company at a valuation higher than any I'd received before. It was a tempting offer. Too tempting. I called Marcus. "I just got an offer from Horizon Equity. They want in. Big time." He whistled softly. "They don't go after small fish." "What's the catch, Control?" I said. "They want voting rights." "Then it's not an offer," Marcus said. "It's a takeover dressed as flattery." He was right. Still, I couldn't ignore what it symbolized: proof that I'd built something powerful enough to threaten giants. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my father, my brother, the people who saw my ambition as a flaw instead of fire. I'd spent so long trying to prove them wrong, and now that I had, I wasn't sure it mattered. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of the cafe where I used to work. I was carrying a tray of drinks again, balancing glasses while guests laughed nearby. Except this time when I looked down, the tray was empty. My reflection stared back at me, older, stronger, but still searching. I woke before dawn, the ocean outside tinted pink with sunrise. I poured myself coffee and whispered into the quiet, "You've proven enough, Elena. Now build peace." But even as I said it, I knew peace would always cost me something too. By mid-morning, I signed the rejection email to Horizon Equity. No deal. Not for shares, not for control, not for anything. Maya glanced up when I came into the office later that day. "You look different," she said. "I made a decision," I replied. "The kind that doesn't make you richer, just freer." She smiled knowingly. "Sometimes that's the same thing." I nodded, glancing at the framed newspaper on my wall. "The Billionaire Who Built Empathy into Luxury." Underneath the headline, my own words were printed from that first interview. Success isn't about proving you were right. It's about knowing who you are when no one's watching. That night I sat by my window again, the city lights reflecting off the glass. Somewhere out there, my father was probably telling someone his daughter got lucky. Maybe he even believed it. But luck never built empires. Grit did. And I had more of it than anyone he'd ever known. I was in a meeting with the design team when my phone started buzzing once, twice, then again. Unknown number. I silenced it the first time. By the fifth call, I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. "This better be good," I muttered, answering. "Elena." "It's Mom." Her voice trembled the way it always did when she was trying to sound calm. Your father, he lost his job. For a moment I said nothing. The words hung in the air like smoke. I see, I said finally. He won't admit it, but he's devastated. The company downsized, and Daniel's firm isn't doing great either. Things are difficult right now. She hesitated. He didn't want me to call, but he's proud. You know how he is. Pride seems to be a family trait, I said softly. Elena, please. He made mistakes, yes, but he's still your father. Maybe you could just talk to him. I glanced through the glass walls into the conference room. My team was waiting for me, faces lit by the glow of architectural renderings of our new resort. A project worth more than what my father had earned in his entire career. I'll think about it, I said, then ended the call. When I walked back into the meeting, Marcus caught my expression instantly. Everything okay? Just family, I said. Let's continue. That evening after everyone left, I sat alone in the office city lights stretching endlessly beyond the window. I thought about the years he'd spent talking down to me, about the times he'd told me to be realistic, to stop embarrassing the family with my little projects. Now the same man who mocked me for dreaming had nothing left but regret. My phone buzzed again. A message from Daniel this time. He's not doing well, Elena. He won't say it, but losing his job broke something in him. If you could reach out, maybe it would help. He still talks about you, pretends he's proud. Maybe you could pretend back. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed 3 words. I'll think about it. Later that night, I opened a bottle of wine and sat on my balcony. The ocean below shimmered in silver ripples. I remembered the night Leo was born, no one had come to the hospital. My father had called 3 days later not to ask about his grandson, but to warn me that raising a kid alone isn't sustainable. I'd hung up mid-sentence. It was the last time I'd cried because of him. The next morning, I flew to Los Angeles for an investor's brunch. I'd barely sat down before one of them, an older man named Gregory Ward, smiled across the table and said, Your father's? Thomas Rivera, right? We used to work together at Fairfield. I blinked. That's right, he chuckled. Small world. I remember him bragging about his kids back in the day. Said one of them would take over his legacy. Guess I did, I said, taking a sip of coffee. Gregory leaned in. He was a good salesman, your dad. Rough around the edges, but sharp. I heard he left Fairfield recently. Something like that. He nodded, sensing the boundary. Well, you've certainly outpaced the old guard. You're in Forbes every quarter. I smiled politely. We build resorts, not reputations. The press just follows the money. After the brunch, I sat in my hotel room and opened my laptop. A new article headline flashed across the screen. From struggle to success, the billionaire mom behind Azure Palms Resorts. The piece mentioned my humble beginnings. My son, even the years my family doubted me. The journalist had done her homework too well. Scrolling further, I stopped cold. There was a quote attributed to my father. I always knew Elena would make something of herself. She was stubborn in the best way. I read it twice, then laughed quietly to myself. He'd found a way to rewrite the story. In his version, he was the wise parent who believed all along. That night I received an email from him, short, polite, formal. Subject, congratulations. Message, I saw the article. You've done well, sweetheart. Maybe we could have dinner soon. My treat. I typed a reply, then deleted it. Then I typed again. Sure. Thursday. 7 p.m., same restaurant as before. When I arrived, he was already there, wearing the same navy blazer he used for business dinners. He looked smaller, somehow older. His confidence, once so unshakable, seemed to have shrunk with his circumstances. Elena, he said, standing up as if I were a client he wanted to impress. You look incredible. Thanks, I said, sitting down. You too. We ordered. The silence between us was thick but polite. He cleared his throat. I've been meaning to reach out sooner. I didn't want to make things awkward. They already were, I said. He winced but nodded. I suppose I earned that. When the food arrived, he picked at his plate, avoiding eye contact. Losing my job wasn't easy. I gave that company 30 years, I know. I guess I understand now what it's like to have people underestimate you. I met his eyes. Do you? He sighed. I was hard on you. Too hard. I thought I was protecting you from disappointment. Turns out I was just protecting my own ego. For the first time in years, I didn't feel angry, just tired. Dad, you didn't fail me by doubting me. You failed me by making me doubt myself. He looked down at his hands. I don't know how to fix that. Maybe you can start by being honest. Not for me, for yourself. He nodded slowly. You've built something amazing. Everyone sees it. I'm proud, Elena. The words hung there, tentative, fragile. I wanted to believe them. Maybe part of me did. When the bill came, I reached for it. He stopped me. I said it's my treat. I smiled faintly. Old habits die hard. Outside, we stood by the valet stand. The air smelled like rain. He looked at me and said, You really don't need anyone, do you? I thought of Leo. Of the people who'd stood by me when he didn't. Of the empire I'd built from ashes. I need the right ones, I said. As the valet pulled up my car, he hesitated. Maybe one day you'll let me be one of them again. I didn't answer. I just opened the door, smiled softly and said, Good night, Dad. When I drove away, the reflection of the restaurant lights faded in my rearview mirror. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was leaving something behind. I was simply moving forward. 3 days after dinner with my father, I woke up to a storm not outside, but on the internet. My PR manager, Ava, called before sunrise. Elena, you need to see this. Now. I sat up groggy, rubbing my eyes. What happened? Someone leaked old photos of your first resort before renovations. Headlines are calling it the Billionaire's Broken Paradise. They're painting you as a fraud who built her empire on debt. I pulled the laptop onto my lap, scrolling through the headlines. Luxury mirage inside the crumbling start of Azure Palms. From single mom to billionaire or borrower. Beneath the headlines were grainy photos of the resort from nearly a decade ago, cracked tiles, unfinished villas, rusted railings. I'd taken those photos myself back when the place was falling apart, and no one believed it could ever become anything. My stomach twisted not because they were false, but because they were true. Ava's voice cut through the static in my head. We're tracing the leak, but it's spreading fast. Someone sent them directly to the Daily Ledger with insider commentary. Said you took shortcuts to build your business. Who I asked. She hesitated. The metadata leads back to your father's old company email. I closed my eyes. Of course. For a moment I couldn't breathe. After everything, the dinner, the apology, the attempt at peace, he'd still found a way to wound me. Or maybe this time to destroy me. Don't release a statement yet, I said finally. Let them talk. Elena. That's not smart PR. I said, wait. I ended the call. For the next 12 hours, the story exploded across every platform. Comment sections filled with strangers debating my worth. Another rich liar exposed. Self-made. More like self-marketed. Guess Daddy's money wasn't enough after all. I'd learned long ago not to read the comments, but I read every one of them that day. Every insult, every accusation. Each word cut in places I thought had already healed. By evening, Marcus called. We should go public, he said. Clarify the timeline. Remind them you bought that resort with your own savings. Transparency's the best weapon. Not yet, I said. Elena, this could hurt stockholder confidence. Our share price dropped 7% today. I know, he sighed. Then tell me what you're planning. Not a defense, I said. A reminder. The next morning I walked into the Azure Palms headquarters in a white linen suit, calm, deliberate, unshaken. Cameras were already waiting outside the glass doors. I smiled at them, then walked past without a word. At noon I called for an emergency press conference. The PR team scrambled, worried, but I insisted on speaking alone. When I stepped onto the stage, flashes went off like fireworks. Thank you for being here. I began, my voice steady. I've seen the headlines. I've read the comments. And I want to tell you they're right about one thing. Those photos are real. A murmur rippled through the crowd. That first resort, the one they're mocking, was falling apart when I bought it. I didn't have investors then. I didn't have a boardroom or press coverage or even a team. I had $72,000 in savings and a 6-month-old baby. Everyone said it would fail. They laughed when I told them I'd rebuild it myself. And they were right to laugh, because it was insane. I paused, letting the silence hang. But I did it anyway. I sold everything I owned: my car, my jewelry, even my engagement ring. I lived in one of those half-finished villas with no running water and cooked over a camp stove while I rebuilt it brick by brick. Those photos aren't my shame. They're my beginning. I looked straight into the cameras. If you want to tell my story, tell all of it. By the time I finished, the room was quiet. No questions, no shouting, just stillness. Then one by one, cameras started flashing again, this time slower, steadier, respectful. When I stepped backstage, Ava's eyes were glassy. "You just turned a scandal into a legacy." "Good," I said, "because I'm done hiding my scars." That night I sat on my balcony, phone in hand, scrolling through the new headlines. From broken resort to billion-dollar empire. Single mom's viral speech redefines resilience. The woman who owned her truth. Leo wandered out, rubbing his eyes. "Mommy, why are you still up? Just finishing work, baby." He climbed into my lap, curling against me. "You work a lot," he mumbled. "I know," I whispered, kissing his hair. "But I'm working for something bigger than work." He looked up sleepily. "Like what?" "Like you." He smiled, eyes half closed. "Then you already won." When he fell asleep in my arms, I watched the waves below and thought about my father. About what drives a man to sabotage his own child. Fear, pride, envy, maybe all of it. But for the first time, I didn't feel angry. I felt pity. The next morning, a delivery arrived at my office, a small box, no note. Inside was an old photo, me as a child sitting on my father's shoulders at the beach. On the back in his handwriting were 3 words. I was wrong. I stared at it for a long time before placing it in my drawer. Some apologies don't need a reply. That afternoon, Ava burst into my office with her phone. "Elena, you have to see this." She turned the screen toward me, the Azure Palms website analytics dashboard. Traffic was up 400%. Bookings had doubled overnight. The scandal hadn't broken us. It has made us stronger. I smiled slowly. Guess the truth always finds its way to the top. Ava laughed through her tears. "You're unbelievable." "Just a single mom playing real estate for beginners," I said with a grin. When she left, I looked out over the ocean, endless blue, forgiving, and thought maybe this was the real empire I'd been building all along. Not resorts, not wealth. Resilience, truth, freedom. And this time, I didn't need the world to see it. I just needed to know it was mine. 2 weeks after the scandal stormed and passed, I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. It started with a simple email: emergency board meeting, attendance mandatory. No explanation, no details. Marcus and I exchanged a look as soon as we saw it. "This can't be good," he muttered. By the time I walked into the boardroom that afternoon, the air felt charged, the kind of stillness that comes before thunder. The board members were already seated, eyes averted, voices hushed. I took my seat at the head of the table, the skyline of Miami glittering behind me like an audience waiting for a verdict. "Let's get to it," I said, folding my hands on the polished wood. "What's this about Martin Graves, the oldest board member and my father's former golfing partner?" Cleared his throat. "Elena, there are concerns, serious ones, about your recent decisions." "Concerns," I repeated evenly. "Would you like to specify?" He exchanged a look with 2 others. "Your press conference, while eloquent, was unconventional. Investors felt it was emotional. Risky." "Emotional," I raised an eyebrow. I told the truth. The market responded. We gained traction, bookings, and brand trust. Last I checked, that's good business. Be that as it may, Martin said some stakeholders question whether personal drama should intersect with corporate identity. "Personal drama built this company." Marcus snapped before I could respond. Without her story, there is no azure palms. A murmur rippled through the table. Another director, Vanessa Cole, leaned forward. We've also been approached by Horizon Equity again. They've revised their offer and it's generous. They want to acquire a controlling interest. It could stabilize the company long term. I froze. We already declined that offer. Yes, she said, but the board feels it's worth revisiting, especially after the recent volatility. Volatility, I laughed under my breath. We just posted our highest quarterly growth in 2 years. Martin leaned back, steepling his fingers. Elena, no one's questioning your success. But leadership requires foresight. You've done remarkable things, truly. But maybe it's time to consider what's best for the company beyond you. The words hit like ice water. Beyond you. Marcus leaned forward, his tone sharp. If you're suggesting a vote to push her out, you'll have to go through me. Vanessa's smile didn't reach her eyes, a thin corporate curve. No one's suggesting that. Yet. I looked around the table. Faces I'd hired. People who'd once praised my vision. Now they looked at me like a liability wrapped in lipstick. So I said slowly, Horizon Equity makes an offer again. You call an emergency meeting. And you tell me this isn't a coup. Don't be dramatic, Martin said. Don't insult me. Silence. Then Marcus spoke, calm but lethal. You realize you're talking about selling the company to a firm that buys brands, strips them for assets, and fires entire teams. It's business, Vanessa said coolly, and emotion has no place in it. I looked straight at her. That's where you're wrong. Emotion built this empire, the kind that comes from sleeping on a construction floor, from maxing out credit cards, from rebuilding when the world said you couldn't. You want to sell that for a quarterly bonus? Her smile wavered. I stood. I founded Azure Palms to prove that luxury could have heart, that people mattered more than margins. If any of you think you can do better, vote me out right now. No one spoke. The hum of the air conditioning filled the room. Martin cleared his throat again. Let's take this to a vote. My stomach tightened. Marcus shot me a look that said, trust me. The vote began. One by one, hands went up, some for, some against. My pulse drummed in my ears. When it ended, Martin announced 4-4. Deadlocked. Marcus smiled faintly. Then, as COO, I'll exercise my tie-breaking authority. He looked directly at me and said, my vote is with the founder. The relief that hit me was sharp and dizzying. Martin scowled. This isn't over. No, I said it's not. But for now, it's settled. The meeting adjourned, and one by one the others filed out. When the door closed, Marcus turned to me. You okay? I exhaled, finally letting the tension leave my shoulders. I should be furious. But mostly I'm grateful. For what? For seeing who's loyal before I forgot who I am. He smiled. You handled that like a CEO. I shook my head. No, like a survivor. That night I went home to Leo. He was sitting on the floor surrounded by Lego towers, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. Hey, champ, I said softly. Building another city? He nodded. This one's unbreakable, he said proudly. I crouched beside him, smiling. Good. The world needs more of those. He looked up, curious. Are you okay, Mommy? I hesitated, then nodded. I will be. Later, after he went to bed, I stood by the window overlooking the city, the same skyline I once dreamed of conquering. Now it wasn't about winning anymore. It was about keeping what mattered safe. My phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. We bought time today. Use it well. I typed back, always do. Then I poured myself a glass of water and whispered into the quiet, let them underestimate me again. I'll remind them who I am. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, not a threat this time, but a promise. Something was coming. And this time, I was ready. It was almost midnight when I heard the knock on my door. Slow, hesitant, the kind that carried more apology than urgency. I didn't need to check the peephole to know who it was. I opened the door and there he stood. My father holding his worn-out leather jacket, eyes sunken from sleepless nights. Elena, he said softly. Can I come in, for a moment, I considered closing the door, but then I saw the exhaustion in his face, the kind that pride couldn't hide anymore. I stepped aside. He entered quietly, looking around as if seeing my home for the first time. His gaze lingered on the framed photos on the wall, me and Leo at one of the resorts, the Azure Palms team, celebrating our expansion, a Forbes cover framed above the console. "You've built quite a life," he murmured. "I had to," I said. He nodded, taking a slow breath. "I didn't come to talk about business. I came because I don't know how to fix what I broke." I crossed my arms. "That's an honest start." He tried to smile, but it faltered. "I saw your speech online, the one where you talked about the first resort. I must have watched it 10 times. You sounded like someone I don't know." "That's because you never tried to." His shoulders dropped. "You're right." He looked down at his hands, rough and trembling. "I thought success was about control. I thought love had to come with advice, with direction. But you didn't need my direction, you needed my belief. And I gave you neither." The silence between us was heavy. For years I'd rehearsed this conversation in my head, imagining what I'd say when he finally came with his apology. But now that he was here, I realized I didn't need to say much at all. He already knew. "I lost everything I thought mattered," he said quietly. "My job, my reputation, the company car, the club membership, all of it. But none of that hurt as much as realizing I lost my daughter long before any of that." My throat tightened, and for the first time in years, the wall I'd built finally gave way. "You didn't lose me, Dad. You just stopped looking for me." He nodded, tears welling. "When your mom told me what I said at dinner, I couldn't sleep for nights. I kept hearing my own words. No man wants a poor single mom. I said that about my own child, the woman who's stronger than anyone I've ever met." I turned away, blinking hard. "Leo," he said suddenly. "How's he doing?" I looked back at him, surprised. "He's good. Smart. Kind. You'd like him." "I already do," he said with a faint smile. "I've seen his interviews, the one where the reporter asked him what his mom does. He said, 'She builds dreams that other people get to visit.'" He took a step closer, hesitated, then said, "I'd like to see him, if you'll let me." I nodded slowly. "He deserves to know his grandfather. But not the man you were that night, the one who saw me as a mistake. Only the one standing here now." He let out a shaky breath. "I can do that." We sat at the kitchen table for the first time in years, no accusations left to throw, just a fragile truce made of regret and understanding. He looked smaller somehow, humbled, human. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked after a long pause. "The quiet life. Before all this?" I smiled faintly. "Sometimes. But then I remember how invisible I felt back then. At least now I'm seen, even if it's by strangers." He nodded, thoughtful. "You know, when I lost my job, I blamed the world. My boss. The economy. Everyone but myself. Then I realized, maybe that's what I did with you too." I met his eyes. "Blame is easy. Accountability isn't." He gave a small laugh, weary but real. "Guess you learned that lesson better than I did." We sat in silence for a while. The clock ticked softly. Somewhere in the distance, waves broke against the shore. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said finally. "But I hope someday when people ask about your father, you won't just remember the things I said wrong. Maybe you'll remember that I tried to fix them." I studied him for a long moment. "Forgiveness isn't a single moment, Dad. It's a process. But tonight, maybe we started it." He smiled through the tears he tried to hide. "Then that's more than I deserve." When he left, I walked him to the door. He turned back, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "You know," he said quietly, "you always had your mother's strength. I just didn't see it because it looked different from mine." "Maybe that's what makes it mine," I said. He nodded. "I'm proud of you, Elena. Truly." This time I believed him. After he was gone, I stood in the doorway for a long time, the sound of the ocean drifting in through the open window. Then I went to Leo's room. He was fast asleep, clutching his stuffed turtle, his small chest rising and falling in rhythm with the waves outside. I sat beside him and brushed the hair from his forehead. "You'll never have to earn love," I whispered again. "Not from me. Not ever." The next morning I found a handwritten note slipped under my door. My father's handwriting uneven but deliberate. "Thank you for opening the door. You didn't have to. You never owed me that. But you gave me something I can't buy back, a second chance to be better. I'll spend whatever time I have left earning it." I folded the note carefully and placed it in my journal beside my grandmother's old photograph. The woman who once told me forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without poison. That morning I finally understood what she meant. Sometimes healing isn't loud or triumphant. It's quiet, like a knock on the door at midnight and a daughter choosing to open it. The ocean was calm that morning, a rare kind of stillness that mirrored the quiet inside me. I stood barefoot on the balcony of my villa in the Maldives, the horizon a seamless line between sea and sky. It was the first time in months I wasn't rushing, no meetings, no press calls, no fires to put out. Just air salt and space to think. Marcus had called earlier, his voice low but urgent. "Elena, Horizon Equity is back, and this time they're offering to buy 70% of Azure Palms." I hadn't answered right away. 70% means I lose control. It also means you walk away with more than $500 million, he said. Total freedom. No more board fights, no more family drama. Just peace, peace. The word lingered. For years I'd thought that's what I was chasing, but I wasn't sure I'd recognize it anymore. Now, hours later, I watched the sun climb higher, the waves reflecting gold. My phone buzzed again, this time Ava. "The offer's serious," she said. "They want to close before the next fiscal quarter. They even mentioned naming you as a lifetime chair just for optics." Optics. I'd spent half my life living for those. "Tell them I'll think about it," I said. When I hung up, Leo appeared at the balcony door, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Mommy, are you going to work again?" "Not today," I said, smiling softly. "Today we decide something important." He climbed onto my lap, resting his head against my shoulder. "Are we moving again?" I laughed quietly. "No, sweetheart. I'm just trying to figure out if I want to stop working so much." He frowned, thinking hard. "But you love your work." "I do," I said, brushing his hair back. "But sometimes loving something means knowing when to let it grow without you." He nodded like he understood, even if he didn't. Kids have a way of sensing truth long before they can define it. That afternoon, I met Marcus and Ava in the main conference suite overlooking the water. The documents were spread across the table, sleek folders stamped with Horizon's logo numbers that looked unreal even to me. I felt no excitement, only the heavy dread of signing away my soul. "This would set you up for life," Ava said. "You and Leo would never have to worry again." "I already don't," I said quietly. "That's the problem. When you start with nothing, you think comfort is the goal. But when you have everything, you realize what you're really after." Marcus studied me. "So what do you want, Elena?" I didn't answer right away. I picked up the Horizon folder, feeling the heavy, cold weight of institutional money. My own business had been built on light on wood, reclaimed from the sea on the warm scent of salt and promise. Selling 70% of it wasn't selling property. It was selling the very story that made Azure Palms matter. "I look at this valuation," I said, placing the folder back down, "and I see what they think my company is worth." But it was never about the price tag for me. It was about proving that empathy is profitable, that you can build luxury with heart. "And if you sell now," Marcus challenged, his tone neutral. "Then I prove my father right," I said simply. "That the woman who built something from nothing is ultimately just another person who sold out for the easy exit. I refuse to let my legacy be defined by a market takeover." I looked out the window at the turquoise sea that had once been a dream on a vision board taped to a crumbling apartment wall. "I want to build something that doesn't end when I sign a contract." He nodded slowly. "Then don't sell." Ava frowned. "Marcus, this is her decision. She already knows," he said. He was right. Somewhere between the headlines, the betrayals, the reconciliations, I had stopped wanting to prove anything. I wanted purpose, not power. Let's draft a counter-proposal, I said finally. They can buy it for 30%, not 70%. No voting rights, but shared profits. And one condition: they fund our new sustainability project. Ava blinked. The coral revival one. That's a huge investment. Exactly, I said. If they want a piece of my empire, they'll help protect the ocean that built it. Marcus grinned. That's the Elena I know. We worked until sunset drafting the new terms. When the final version was ready, I signed it and closed the folder. The weight that left my chest was indescribable, like setting down a stone I'd been carrying so long I forgot it wasn't part of me. Later that night, after everyone left, I wandered down to the shoreline. The tide was low, the sand cool beneath my feet. I could still hear my father's voice from that night at dinner, the cruel certainty in his tone. No man wants a poor single mom. But here I was, not poor, not powerless, not waiting for anyone to want me. I knelt and let the water wash over my hands. For years I had built, fought, proven, and for the first time I didn't need to fight anymore. A soft voice broke through my thoughts. You okay, Mommy? Leo stood behind me, barefoot, holding his tiny flashlight. I'm perfect, I said, smiling. You know why? He shook his head. Because I finally made a choice that wasn't about proving who I am. It was about being who I am. He smiled sleepily. Then can we get pancakes tomorrow? I laughed. That's the best idea I've heard all day. He ran back toward the villa, the light bobbing in his hand. I stayed a while longer, staring at the horizon, endless, shifting, free. The next morning, Horizon Equity accepted the counteroffer. Their CEO called personally, saying, You drive a hard bargain, Rivera. Only because I built something worth protecting, I said. He laughed. You know you could have walked away with a fortune. I already have, I replied. After the call, I looked out at the ocean one last time before heading to the airport. The air smelled of salt and promise. Maybe peace wasn't about stillness after all. Maybe it was about standing in motion, steady, unafraid, knowing exactly who you are. When I turned to leave, Leo's tiny hand slipped into mine. Are we going home now? Yes, I said. We're going home. And for the first time, I knew exactly where that was. The studio lights were blinding, the kind that made you feel stripped bare no matter how expensive your clothes or how calm your smile looked. Across from me sat Marissa Kent, the host of the Spotlight Hour, one of the most watched business programs in the country. She had that journalist's poise, polished but predatory. Welcome back, she said to the camera. Today we're joined by the woman everyone's talking about, Billionaire resort founder and CEO Elena Rivera. The audience clapped politely. I smiled, my fingers loosely interlaced on my lap. Marissa turned to me. Elena, thank you for being here. Thank you for having me. I think it's safe to say, she said, leaning forward, your story has fascinated the nation. From single mom to resort billionaire, it's the kind of headline that almost sounds like fiction. I smiled faintly. It felt like fiction sometimes. She laughed lightly. But not everyone's buying it, are they? Some critics say your success was built on luck. Viral marketing, celebrity endorsements, timing. What do you say to that? Luck helps, I said evenly. But luck doesn't get you through the nights you sleep on construction floors or when payroll is due and your account balance is negative. Luck doesn't make you face rejection 100 times and still show up. Determination does. So if luck showed up, it found me already working. The crowd chuckled. Marissa's eyes flickered. She wasn't expecting that answer. Fair enough, she said, smiling. But let's talk about something more personal. Your father was quoted at a dinner saying, No man wants a poor single mom. That clip went viral. I have to ask, how did that moment affect you? A hush fell over the audience. The producers loved that question. I could see it in their eyes through the glass wall. Drama cells. I took a breath. That dinner wasn't about humiliation. It was a revelation. I realized that the people who love you can still see you through their own fears. My father was raised in a world that believed a woman's worth depended on who she married, not what she built. I stopped believing that the same night. The audience clapped softly, not loud, but warm. Marissa tilted her head. And now, has that relationship changed? It has, I said. He's learning. I'm learning. Forgiveness is slower than success, but it lasts longer. Marissa smiled, clearly caught off guard by the calm in my tone. That's beautifully said. I shrugged slightly. It's true. She glanced at her notes. Your company, Azure Palms, recently rejected a multi-billion-dollar buyout offer. People called it reckless. Others called it visionary. Which was it? Both, I said, smiling. Reckless because I refused easy money. Visionary because I refused to sell something I built from soul-knot spreadsheets. Azure Palms isn't just about luxury resorts. It's about reminding people that rest isn't a reward, it's a right. Her eyebrows lifted. You make it sound personal. It is, I said. When you've gone through exhaustion, emotional, financial, spiritual, you start to understand that creating places of rest is revolutionary. A murmur of appreciation spread through the audience. Marissa hesitated, then smiled again. Your story has inspired millions, Elena. But I have to ask, is there anything you regret? I thought for a moment. The question hit deeper than she probably intended. Yes, I said finally. I regret how long I believed I had to earn love. From my father, from the world, even from myself. Success doesn't heal that, but honesty does. The room fell silent. Even Marissa didn't have a follow-up for that one. After a long pause, she said softly, That might be the most honest thing anyone's ever said on this show. The audience applauded, this time genuinely. She glanced toward the monitor. Before we wrap up, I have one surprise. I frowned slightly. Oh! A stage assistant whispered something in her ear. Marissa smiled wider. We have someone special backstage who wanted to say congratulations. The studio doors opened and I froze. It was my father. He walked slowly toward the stage, dressed in a simple gray suit. The crowd gasped, half recognizing him from that viral dinner clip. I stood unsure what to expect: an apology, a statement, or just another public misunderstanding. He reached me, looked directly into my eyes, and said, I once told you no man would want a poor single mom. I was wrong. The world wanted to see what a strong woman could build, and I'm proud it was my daughter who showed them. The studio erupted in applause. I felt tears sting my eyes before I could stop them. He leaned in slightly, whispering, so only I could hear, I watched you more than you know. You made me unlearn everything I thought I knew about strength. I squeezed his hand gently. It's never too late to learn. Marissa wiped at her eyes, clearly caught up in the moment. Well, she said, her voice trembling slightly, I think we can all agree that was worth tuning in for. When the cameras cut, the lights dimmed. My father and I stood quietly as crew members moved around us. He looked tired but lighter. I wasn't sure if I should come, he said quietly. But when I saw you talk about forgiveness, I figured I should try earning it. You just did, I said. He smiled faintly. Maybe next time dinner's on me. Only if I pick the restaurant, I teased. He laughed, really laughed, and for the first time it didn't sound like mockery or defense. It sounded like peace. Later, as I stepped out of the studio, the night air hit my face. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but none of it mattered. My father stood beside me, not as a critic, not as a shadow, just as a man trying to do better. We walked toward the waiting car, the noise fading behind us. Where to now? He asked. Home, I said. Always home. He nodded. Then let's go. And for the first time since that dinner long ago, walking beside him didn't feel like a burden. It felt like balance, the kind that comes not from being understood, but from finally being seen. The invitation arrived in an ivory envelope embossed with gold lettering, Daniel and Clara Rivera Renewal of Vows, Grand Haven Country Club. The same place where my family had once whispered about my failures, where my father's words about my worth still echoed in the corners. I stared at the card for a long moment before setting it down on my desk. Marcus raised an eyebrow when he saw it. You're not seriously thinking about going, are you? I don't know, I said. Part of me wants to decline. The other part wants to walk in wearing the truth. He smirked. You always did like a good entrance. I laughed softly, but the truth was, I wasn't sure I had the strength for another family gathering full of old wounds and polite smiles. Still, when my father called 2 days later saying, "Your brother would like you there," something in his voice told me it wasn't just about Daniel. It was about closure. On the night of the event, I stood in front of the mirror in a dark blue gown, elegant but simple. No diamonds, no statement jewelry, just quiet confidence. Leo, now 8, watched from the doorway, adjusting his little tie. "You look like a movie star mom." I smiled. "You look like my favorite co-star." He grinned proudly and we drove to Grand Haven together, the car filled with ocean air and a quiet tension I couldn't shake. When we arrived, the ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and soft jazz. The guests looked like a page from a luxury magazine, pearls, champagne, polite laughter. And then there was Daniel standing at the center of it all, his arm around Clara, both of them glowing under the soft lights. He spotted me and froze for a second, his smile faltering before he composed himself. "Elena," he said, walking over his tone carefully polite. "You came." "I did?" I said, meeting his gaze evenly. "Congratulations." He nodded. "You look different." "I am," I replied. Clara joined us, her warmth genuine. "Elena, I'm so glad you're here. We've been following your interviews. The one on the Spotlight Hour made me cry." "Thank you," I said, surprised by her sincerity. My father approached them looking uneasy but proud. He placed a hand on my shoulder. "You being here means more than you know." "It means more than I thought it would," I said. Dinner was served. Leo sat beside my father, who was awkwardly but earnestly trying to talk to him about school and soccer. It was strange and healing to watch them laugh together, even in small, halting bursts. Halfway through dessert, Daniel stood up to make a toast. "Marriage," he began, raising his glass, "isn't about perfection. It's about learning who you are, who you want to be, and who you need to forgive." He looked directly at me. "I've spent years thinking I had it all figured out. But lately I've realized how wrong I was about a lot of things, especially about my sister." The room fell silent. Daniel continued, voice softer now. "Elena, I used to mock you. I called your dreams foolish. I treated your success like luck. But watching you build what you did, it's changed how I see everything. You didn't just prove us wrong, you reminded us what resilience looks like." Clara's hand found his. He raised his glass toward me. "To my sister, the strongest person I know." The applause that followed felt like a release. For the first time, I didn't shrink from it. I accepted it not as validation, but as acknowledgement. When the music resumed, I walked out to the terrace for air. The night was calm, the scent of baked apples and sea salt drifting through the breeze. I leaned on the railing, watching the reflections dance across the lake. A voice came from behind me. "You know, I think you just made him a better man." I turned to see my father standing there, 2 glasses of wine in hand. He offered me one. "Apple cider," he added quickly. "Non-alcoholic. I remember you said you stopped drinking before big days." I took it, touched by the gesture. Old habits die hard. He looked out at the water. "You've changed this family, Elena. More than you know. Even Daniel, he used to measure success by status. Now he measures it by peace. Maybe we all had to lose each other a little before we could find what matters." He smiled faintly. "I was a fool for a long time. I thought raising children meant giving them direction. But I see now it's about giving them space to become who they already are." I looked at him, the man who once couldn't say my name without criticism. Now he sounded almost humble. "I'm proud of you," he said again. "Not just for the company or the headlines. For choosing forgiveness when I didn't deserve it." The words settled over me like a benediction. We stood in silence for a while, watching the lights shimmer over the lake. Then Leo came running out holding Daniel's phone. "Mom, Uncle Daniel's showing everyone your new resort. The one in Fiji." I laughed, shaking my head. "He just wants an excuse to visit." "Can you blame him?" my father said, chuckling. "If I had your life, I'd never leave the beach." I turned to him. "You could, the The Maldives project needs someone to oversee guest relations. Someone who understands people and redemption. He blinked, stunned. You're offering me a job? I smiled. I'm offering you a chance. He looked down, then met my eyes again. I'll take it if you'll have me. I already do. When we returned inside, the music had slowed. Daniel was dancing with Clara. Leo was twirling with other kids near the buffet. The night was warm, alive, full of something I hadn't felt in years: belonging. As I stood there surrounded by laughter and forgiveness, I realized something simple and true: wealth was never the empire. Healing was, and for the first time, it felt like home. The morning light spilled across the terrace, golden and forgiving. I stood barefoot with a cup of coffee in my hands, watching the waves roll in like they'd done every day for years, steady, patient, eternal. The ocean had become my teacher. It never fought the tide. It just moved with it. Leo came running down the path, his laughter carried on the wind. Mom, Grandpa's on the phone again, I smiled. Tell him I'll call him back after breakfast. He said it's important. Leo's eyes were wide with mischief. He said to tell you his new uniform finally fits. I laughed, shaking my head. My father had started working as a guest liaison for Azure Palms Maldives 3 months ago. He sent me updates like postcards, the turtle hatchlings, the coral restoration progress, the guests who told him he looked like me when he smiled. Each message was softer, lighter. Maybe this was how redemption looked, not loud, not grand, but consistent. I called him back. Morning, Dad. How's paradise treating you? His voice came through the line, full of warmth. I once thought impossible. Better every day. You were right, the sea makes you honest. I looked out at the horizon. It does. He chuckled. And for the record, I've stopped giving unsolicited advice. I even started yoga. Now that I said laughing, I need to see to believe. Come visit, he said. You, Leo. Maybe your brother and Clara too. I'll show you around the reef. It's peaceful here. Something in his tone made my chest ache, not with sadness, but with gratitude. We'll come soon, I promised. After we hung up, Leo tugged at my sleeve. Can we really go see Grandpa's island? Yes, sweetheart, I said. We'll go. He grinned, and I watched him run off toward the garden where Ava and Marcus were setting up for brunch. They'd both flown in from Miami for our company's annual retreat. Azure Palms wasn't just mine anymore, it belonged to all of us who had built it from dreams and defiance. As I joined them, Marcus raised a glass of juice. To another year of growth. And to our fearless founder who somehow made the world believe that rest is luxury's truest form. Not fearless, I corrected. Just done being afraid. They laughed, clinking glasses. Later that afternoon, the three of us sat on the beach going over plans for the Coral Revival Project's next phase. You realize this will make Azure Palms the first hospitality group in the region to be fully carbon neutral, Ava said. That's the point, I replied. If we're going to profit from paradise, we have to protect it too. Marcus smiled. You've turned this company into more than business. It's a legacy. Not mine, I said quietly. Ours. He nodded, and we watched the waves in silence. That evening, after the team dinner, I walked alone along the shore. The moon hung low silver over the water. Somewhere behind me, laughter floated from the villas my people, and my family not by blood, but by choice. I thought about how far we'd come from that dinner table, where I was dismissed, to this one where I was celebrated. From the girl who once thought success would fill the hollow spaces, to the woman who realized peace did. The sound of footsteps pulled me from my thoughts. My father approached barefoot. His pant legs rolled up, looking more at home here than I'd ever seen him. I told you the sea changes you, he said with a small smile. I think it healed you, I said. Maybe it healed us both. We walked in silence for a while, the water lapping at our feet. Then he stopped. You know, Elena, I used to think legacy was about money, property, stock shares. But standing here, I realize it's not. Legacy is who keeps your name safe in their heart. I looked at him, eyes stinging. Then you've built a good one. He smiled faintly. You taught me how. The tide rolled in cool and steady, erasing our footprints as quickly as we made them. When we reached the pier, Leo was waiting with a seashell in his hand. "Grandpa," he said proudly, "I found one shaped like a heart." My father crouched down, his face softening. "Then keep it safe, Leo. Hearts are fragile, but they can hold whole worlds if you take care of them." Leo nodded solemnly. "Like Mommy, exactly like Mommy." That night after Leo fell asleep, I sat on the terrace again. The moonlight brushed the water in silver ribbons, and the sound of the waves felt like the rhythm of my own peace, slow, certain, and finally mine. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was chasing anything. Not success, not validation, not even forgiveness. I already had everything that mattered: peace, purpose, and people who stayed. I opened my journal, the same one I'd kept since the first resort broke ground, and wrote, "Full circle doesn't mean going back. It means arriving at the place you were always meant to be, but finally whole." The next morning as the sun rose, I filmed a short message for our company's new campaign. My voice was calm, steady. To anyone who's ever been told they're not enough, don't fight to prove them wrong. Build until their words don't matter anymore. Rest isn't the opposite of work. It's what gives it meaning. I paused, then smiled. And if you're watching this wherever you are, thank you for believing in second chances, for believing in yourself. When I finished recording, Marcus looked up from behind the camera. "That's a wrap," he said. "Perfect as always." I shook my head. Not perfect. Just real. As we packed up, Leo ran toward me, waving another seashell in the sunlight. Behind him, the ocean shimmered like glass. I lifted him into my arms, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "Let's go home." He pointed toward the horizon. "That way?" "Yes," I said. "Always that way." And together we walked toward the water, the place where everything began, and where everything finally